So this is my luggable computer. It's an IBM XT, which was actually manufactured in 1984, I think. I picked it up. I picked it up in 1989 for the princely sum of I think $900. I can't remember how much memory it had. We'll get into that in a little bit. This is the cache of floppies I've had sitting around since that time as well. And recently I've been thinking to myself, how can I pull those things out and look at them? And the answer was, they now make an IDE controller that is capable of that. So I picked up one of these little cards and I tried to hook it up to a more modern disk subsystem. I'm actually using compact flash. So across the top there are the early ones I worked with, the Cisco, the 8K bytes. But it turned out that the SanDisk Ultra cards were the best ones to work with. So mine was a 5155. So when you've got the oldest of the old in terms of computers, the original, it turns out that they are really, really, really slow. So the only cards that the gentleman who sold me this, Kevin, recommended was the SanDisk Ultra 2. I did get a couple of them. Of course, I didn't plan it very well, so I would buy a card. It would take several weeks to get here. That card would be bad. That Ultra 2 4 gigabyte in the right-hand corner up there. Never got that to work, but that took about a month. And then I bought the bottom three, and that worked a lot better the first time, of course, when I had a couple of options. I also didn't have a lot of luck getting it to work with the USB built-in compact flash reader, so I picked up this IDE controller and added it to my computer. That made things a lot easier for some reason. And of course, I was, just completely surprised that modern computers don't have IDE interfaces anymore. So here I am. I've got the compact flash plugged in, and I'm actually looking at it. I bought it from a camera store, so you can see it's the camera partition there. I'm going to remove the partition or the volume and the drive letter. This actually will prevent the OS from jumping in and messing with it when I'm trying to give it to a VM to format and add DOS to. So I'm going to get rid of the volume. I'm going to get rid of the drive. Now I'm going to open Command Prompt and VirtualBox as a local administrator to have rights to run some of these commands. I had a chicken and egg problem. I really wanted to run a version of DOS, but none of my disks would actually load. So I needed to somehow get DOS onto the compact flash without having a floppy drive. So I came across this instructions installing MS-DOS 622 on a 46 without a floppy drive using a CF to IDE adapter. And essentially, you find your drive, the compact flash, which is coming up as physical drive 2, and then you use this command to actually create that as physical disk. So now I'm going to go into Program Files, Oracle, Virtual Center, or VirtualBox. Oh man, I'm just going to goof that up every time and actually create that partition. I did this, oh my gosh, dozens of times. As I said, though, the most successful was when I actually had the IDE controller in my desktop and not going through the USB. Those didn't seem to be as reliable. So here I am creating the VM. It's just going to be a DOS VM. The minute I typed DOS in the name, it figured out the type was other in DOS. And we're going to use an existing disk. It's the one I created in the background there. It's just that easy. Now the next step will be actually updating the floppy settings to use the DOS 622 disk image. I'll show you in a minute. I just grabbed DOS 622 off the internet. There's the first of 4 floppies. I got it from allbootdisks.com. You can actually, as you're installing it, cycle through these things pretty easily. So here we are starting it up. We've got the volume mounted to the physical compact flash. We're starting DOS based on the image. Right now it's just configuring everything that's available. Interestingly enough, that's going to be about 512 meg. DOS 622 only had the ability to see, I think, 8 gig total. So, and I think you had to carve for the first volume, for some reason it wanted to only be 512 meg. So now we are moving the installation onto the drive. You can actually just in VirtualBox mount the partition and then hit enter on the screen, and it just keeps going. If you're foolish enough to click on the screen with your mouse, it'll capture your mouse, and then you'll have to hit Control-Alt-Delete or something to get back out to change the device. So now it's asking for disk 3, and it's the same thing. You just use that image. And once that is complete, it will reboot. Well, at this point, I will take that card out and put it into my original IBM XT to boot. I've done this so many times that I just wanted to sort of run through my process for anyone who's interested. Here's the actual computer. You can see the compact flash card right there. That's it's essentially just goes to the IDE controller. There's the 8088. So here I've sort of just showed you essentially what my basement looks like, and now we're booting. What's left of the luggable is over there on the right. I've got the floppy drive. It's a half-height floppy drive just sitting on the table there. You can see on the ribbon cable next to it, just to the right, is the graphics card. I'm doing like a composite image out because that was the only graphics card I could find. And it's too big to actually put the computer back together. So whenever I work on this, I just slide the graphics card in, copy some floppies, try and run some programs, and then I pull the graphics card out and put it all away so the cat doesn't try and nest in there. There's a lot of extra wires there, but that's why the image isn't that great in terms of the graphics. I'm using it's essentially a text card. It's not even like a CGA or an EGA. It just has like 80 columns text for a really old compact that I also had sitting on the shelf. So now you can see we've booted up to DOS 622. We're on the C drive. We only have 256K of memory in this particular computer. I thought I had another board for that, but what happened was, often these things became parts for the next computer. So anything that was good would be taken out and moved forward. Fortunately, I took these parts, even though they don't look that great a shape, put them on a shelf, and I still own the building with that shelf in it today. So even though I probably stopped using this in '93, it sat on the shelf. I just had to get it off the shelf, went to my dad's pickup truck, blew the crickets out of it, and cleaned up the rat poison that was on it, and tried to find some parts for it to get it running again. On the left there, you can see I'm trying to do a directory, and it's taking forever. Well, this wasn't really designed to load a disk drive of 512 meg. I think my first few hard drives are like 10 meg and 20 meg. So now I'm going into Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and we're gonna start that. Looking at the floppy drive on the right there, that's the second one. I burnt one up. A lot of the equipment is a little fragile at this point. The two floppy drives I did get to use, I needed to clean them very well before actually getting them to read a disk, because the grease that was allowing the drive head to move back and forth often sort of caramelizes and turns into cement. So I have to wipe that off, and I would use like a white lithium grease instead, and then I would use like an alcohol swab on the heads to clean those up. And since the discs are so old, I would have to actually do that pretty frequently because they're just turning to dust. I think maybe like 1 out of 10 of mine failed. So I was able to pull down a bunch of hits from the 80s and 90s on these old floppies, which is kind of nice, and put them all on the compact flash. That's what you saw go by just a second ago when I did the directory from the C drive. Is I would load every floppy, copy to its own folder, do an X copy, take all the subfolders, and then create a folder for each floppy drive, note it to know which ones were bad. The power supply that you see there is actually an ATX power supply. That actually came out of my XPS Dell recently because I wanted to get a better graphics card, so I needed a power supply with at least 500 watts, and that one's only 450. So I converted that over to work with the XT motherboard because the two AT power supplies I have are not in great shape. So the one there that you can see on the right in the original luggable does work, but it's super loud. It's only 135 watts, so I literally could not plug in like the compact flash and a floppy drive. I had to use another power supply to do that. So I burnt up a couple of those. Finally, I found one that would work, and it looked like it was in pretty good shape. But once again, it was basically an AT power supply sitting on a shelf for 20 years, so it was not in great shape. The 12 volts was only about 10.5 volts. It did work, but I've been looking for something that's a little bit more solid. And converting that ATX power supply over to an AT power supply really only took a couple of interesting cables. You can buy them pretty easily to go from the ATX pinout to the original XT pinout. And I also had to go back to the old Molex adapter because the ATX only has the new power connectors for like SATA drives. So yeah, no, I don't have any converters for that, so had to figure that out. On the desk there, you can see my original keyboard that actually is the base of the luggable. It protects the front of it. It slides into place, locks, and the luggable, when you put it on the ground, it will sit on that keyboard. So that is pretty sturdy. It makes a nice clicky noise when you use it. Very satisfying. Unfortunately, I have done it wrong repeatedly. So when I cannibalized this, like back in the 90s, for some reason I got into my head back then that I needed to keep that cable safe. Well, I did not. I put it in one box after another over the last 15 or 20 years of junk. And it got flattened like Wile E. Coyote in a cartoon. I mean, I basically had to rebuild it, and then I didn't do it right. What you can see there over the 0 key is a telephone adapter, which I did get to work, but in the process, I actually soldered on some additional wires to get that in there onto the old wires. Well, it's 35-plus-year-old cable, so it's not great. A lot of the vinyl in here just kind of turns to mush when you get it too warm, so there was some shorting, some arcing, some sparking. I kind of turned it into a toaster. So that cable is not in great shape. Every now and then you'll just be sitting there, well, I'll just be sitting here typing, and it'll get a little tremor in the cable, but you'll get extra characters. I did buy a bag of 5-pin DIN connectors so that I can replace it. That is up on my to-do list. My wife, Catherine, is not thrilled with... So, keep in mind, when that keyboard shorted itself out, it could have started a fire pretty easily. I mean, it got really super toasty warm and kind of orangey. So it's probably not good to have the case open, and I can't close it because of that dumb 80-column text card, which you can see just a half inch over the top of the power supply over there. Can't get the back on. So I did buy a new ATX case, top of the line, spent $23 on the case, $7 shipping. That'll be here in the next week or so. And it's going to be super easy to mount that ATX power supply in there. That's what it's designed for. I'll have to hook up all the LEDs, of course. The XT keyboard, well, I haven't quite figured out what I'm going to do with that yet. So I have the ability to replace the wire. I might do that. I also did find a blog where someone had taken a PS2 keyboard and converted it. You know, it's sort of an archaeological history lesson working on this old stuff, because back in the day when we had keyboards, we probably forgot that at some point they had like XT PC switches on them, and then those just went away. I did see a blog online where I could use a small microcontroller, insert it into a PS2 inline, PS2 keyboard inline, and then convert a modern keyboard into an XT keyboard. So we'll see if I burnt this one up a little bit too much, or if I can get it working. I like to get it working because even though it has sort of a non-traditional layout, and that's, once again, all of this stuff, this is formative. We didn't have any idea of what we were doing back then. We just made it up. So the layout of the keyboard's terrible. It feels good to type with, if you can remember where the backslash is. But yeah, that wasn't great. Even doing things like, booting it, it doesn't have a BIOS as such. It has dip switches on the motherboard that you set if you want to make a change. I've been playing around with those quite a bit, swapping in other boards, trying to get some video cards to work. Not so much luck there. I do have a VGA coming in January. A lot of the equipment I'm buying, I'm getting from the former Soviet Union and Russian affiliated states. For some reason, they have old 8-bit ISA VGA cards in that country. God bless them. So they're sending me one right now. I'm going to get that in there. In theory, I should be able to close the case up once the ATX case gets here. But if I'm putting together a wish list, I got to get that VGA card working. Probably the next thing is I've seen that there's a new extended memory board that you can get for original XTs that'll bring it up to a gig. Those cost about $50. This if you're looking for what I want for Christmas next year, this is it. Probably that memory adapter, so I can get the full, meg of memory. That's the thing that's kind of funny. I have to watch myself not to do the old person thing of going back from kilobytes to megabytes to gigabytes. No, this was 256K. If I spend another $50, I can get up to a meg, which I need because I'm trying to run like Borland Pascal and Borland C++. Those won't run in the current configuration. It looks like hell in the current configuration, just because of the graphics adapter, only doing sort of black and white. I get the VGA card, maybe get some more memory, figure out what I'm going to do with the keyboard. Did I mention? I don't think you can see it here, but there's also an extra power plug for my Commodore 64, because I also use the exact same ATX power supply for the Commodore 64. Oh, you can see the 9-volt adapter. Okay, lazy, super lazy. Instead of like adjusting a 12-volt leg down to 9 volts, I just bought a 9-volt DC adapter and slapped it in there. So that's what you see on the left side of the keyboard there. That's the 9-volt adapter that's strictly for the Commodore 64. So I figure out what I'm going to do with that, because this does power my Commodore 64 too. I might have to have like a power cable coming out of the back of it, maybe do some mounts for that. We'll see if we get around to it. I'm just hoping I can get the XT keyboard to fit in there. That would be fantastic. And unfortunately, I don't seem to be able to get the original computer luggable, sort of in pristine condition. That would be pretty hard. It was pretty beat up when I got it back in 1989. I've been going through a lot of old floppies, finding some of the stuff I did back then, and it's not a lot of rocket science brain surgery. It's mostly just homework assignments, but it's kind of fun to see what you were doing when you were a kid. And this is what I've been working on now. For those of you who've actually been watching the screen, one of the things I wanted to do was get out the original Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I actually have a copy of this disc around here somewhere. I don't have it someplace I can find it, of course. It's probably in one of those totes on the shelf back there. But it is available freely on the Abandonware website. Not a lot of people looking for DOS 8-bit games these days, but I am one of them. So this is what I've been up to. Hope to get that back together, get the VGA card, get the keyboard sorted, and then, move on to other projects. So anyway, thanks for paying attention. Talk to you soon.